Number 79 in the periodic table of chemical elements, gold had been highly valued by people since ancient times. It is estimated that about 161,000 tons of gold have been mined throughout human history, the market value of which is approximately $9 trillion. The exact number of people who died in this is unknown. My name is Andrei Bobrovsky. I'm PhD in history. Almost 10 years have passed since I've posted my clips about the history of my hometown. Now I want to tell several stories about Russian soldiers who died for yellow metal. Soon after the discovery of America, a gold rush begins in Europe. In the early 16th century, thousands of adventurers set off for the New World to get rich. In the tropical jungles of Amazon and Orinoco, they are looking for a golden city in golden land of Eldorado. In history, these cruel and ruthless cutthroats are known by the name conquistadors. In turn, the name Eldorado has firmly established itself in all European languages. It has become synonymous with the Promised Land, where gold and wealth in the broad sense of the word await every brave person who is willing to take risks to find the Eldorado and the luck. The first Russian conquistadors should be considered freebooters and soldiers of Moscow Tsar. Half a century after the Europeans' adventurers, in pursuit of fur wealth, they set off beyond the Urals into the Siberian tundra and taiga. In Russia, these cutthroats are called Siberian pioneers. But my films will be focused on later events that occurred during the reign of Peter Alexeyevich Romanov, the founder of the Russian Empire, known by the names Tsar Peter I and Russian Emperor Peter the Great. He is one of the key figures in Russian history. Tsar Peter is a ruthless tyrant and despot for whom the population of Russia was expendable material for the realization of his imperial ambitions. Legends are told about the methods of his cultural westernization of Russian people. He waged endless wars on the borders of the state throughout his life. Under Peter the Great, the ideology of imperialism and militarism has firmly taken root in Russia. Since then, it became a military threat to its neighbors. It is no coincidence that the figure of the emperor in Putin's Russia presents itself a cult figure. Recently, new monuments to the emperor are literally springing up like mushrooms after rain across the whole country. Among them stands out a huge figure in Moscow. This thing weighs more than 2,000 tons and is taller than the Statue of Liberty in New York, a funny joke by unknown artists about untalented sculpture and at the same time of the cult of the emperor that has developed and flourishes in Russia. The mighty Siberian river Irtysh, one of the longest inflows in the world. Its sources are lost on the western slopes of the Mongolian Altai. In the middle course, the Irtysh crosses the Great Steppe, the cradle of civilization for many nomadic peoples. The Oira tribes nomadized here in 17th, early 18th centuries. By language, they belong to Western Mongols. On the border of Russian Siberia, they founded a powerful multinational state called the Jangar Khanate. The population of the state is around 25 million people. The former territory of Jangaria today is part of Russia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia and China. Early in the morning of October 1st, 1715, on the high bank of the river landed a military detachment under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Buckholz. On the slope of the riverbank, the officers ordered two soldiers to make dugouts on built barns for storing artillery and provisions. In early November, the first Siberian thrust struck. At night, with a quiet rustle, slush began to flow down the river. The soldiers and officers of the Russian Expeditionary Corps faced a difficult wintering in a deserted area. Fate brought Lieutenant Colonel Buckholz in Siberia by the will of Tsar Peter the Great. According to some sources, Buckholz's family originated from the small village located in the modern German land of Schleswig-Holstein. According to other sources, Ivan Buckholz came from a family of impoverished Moscow nobles. At an early age, he joined the privileged Preobrazhensky Life Guards Regiment, organized by the Tsar himself. The Tsar patronized the regiment and personally well knew Ivan Buckholz, whom Peter entrusted the task of carrying out a special military operation. The decree on Buckholz's assignment appeared on the eve of the naval battle of Gangut. The Russian Tsar is actively preparing for upcoming general battle. At the Admiralty shipyards in the new capital of St. Petersburg, a new galley fleet is being urgently built. At the same time, Tsar held in mind another task. On May 9, 1714, the Russian fleet leaves St. Petersburg. The Tsar's ship Standard is raised on the galley St. Natalia. On board the galley on May 22nd, the Tsar signs a decree on sending Buckholz to the capital of the Siberian province, the city of Tobolsk. Lieutenant Colonel is instructed during the winter to form an armed detachment from local recruits and Swedish POWs. The following spring, he was to set out from Tobolsk upstream by high water with the aim of searching and capturing gold sand deposits near the city of Yarkand, deep in Jangaria. Today, the city of Yarkand is located in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in China. Even after signing the decree about sending Buckholz to Siberia, thoughts about gold don't leave the Tsar's head. A few days later, on May 29, on board battleship St. Catherine, Peter signs another decree, this time about sending another military expedition to Central Asia to search for gold deposits and at the same time an overland route to India. The next day, on the ship's deck in close friendly company, Tsar Peter merrily celebrates his 42nd birthday. On this occasion, from the ship, mortars and howitzers fire. The trigger of historical events is considered to be the report of Siberian governor Prince Matvey Gagarin about gold mining in eastern Turkestan. In fact, news about gold deposits in Asia the Tsar had received earlier from Asian merchants. In addition, Peter received information about the discovery of significant number of gold items from burial mounds in Siberia. A large collection of this gold is now stored in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. Thus, the Tsar concludes that somewhere in Siberia really exist rich deposits of yellow metal. Along with the Tsar, the main character in this story is a rich noble Moscow boyar, Prince Matvey Gagarin. He is a descendant of the ancient royal Rurik dynasty, which ruled the Moscow state until this dynasty died out. Gagarin got rich by stealing state money and through illegal dealings in trade with China, which at that time was a monopoly of the Moscow state. It is from here, the city of Nerchinsk, at those times trade caravans went to China. Russian merchants profitably exchanged Siberian furs for various Chinese goods. It was during Gagarin's leadership of the Nerchinsk district administration that Gagarin took control of Chinese trade. The well-informed Prussian diplomat Johann Fackerod believes that transit trade with China was potentially extremely profitable if it weren't for the fraud of Governor Gagarin. bypassing the laws of the Moscow state. He included his people in the trade caravans and his own goods, while taxes flowed past the treasury but into the pocket of the corrupt official and untold profit poured in. Gagarin became the richest man of his time, and not only in Russia, but also in Europe. The total value of his property exceeded 3 million rubles, approximately the same amount Russia spent on the war against Sweden for the 21 years. Expenses on endless wars and gigantic embezzlement are devastating the royal treasury. Tsar Peter is looking for additional sources to replenish the meager state budget. And so, in a situation of budget crisis, Gagarin's stories about gold mining in the east captivate the Russian monarch. In my opinion, one should distinguish the motives of behavior of the Russian Tsar and the Siberian governor. The motive of the Tsar's behavior is perfectly clear to me. Therefore, he tries to seize gold deposits and find a road to India. India attracts the Tsar from the point of view of organizing transit trade with Europe, following the model of Chinese trade. Well, what does Gagarin really care about finding a transit route to India? Concern for the revenues of the royal treasury also won't bring him any dividends, except perhaps for the Tsar's gratitude, the content of which we will learn in my next film. And therein lies the mystery of Gagarin's behavior. In one of the films, titled Tabol, the author explained Gagarin's involvement by a bribe received in exchange for Russia's invasion of Jangaria. For many years, the rulers of Janga Kagana with varying success have waged wars with the neighbors, the Tsin Empire. It is logical to assume that Russia's military invasion of Jangaria, objectively speaking, plays into China's hands. But there is one nuisance. In historical sources, information about the bribery of the Siberian governor is completely absent. Another version of Gagarin's strange behavior appears during the lifetime of Tsar Peter. Its author is Swedish POW exiled to Tobolsk Philip Johann von Strahlenberg. Strahlenberg transmits rumors about the separatism of Prince Gagarin, who intended to make Siberia independent from Moscow. I personally don't believe the Strahlenberg's gossip. First Russian historian of German origin, Gerhard Müller, who spent in Siberia 10 years as a head of scientific expedition, met the eyewitnesses including Buchholz himself and wrote down carefully all conversations. Müller claims that no conspiracy was heard of in Tobolsk. However, Gagarin's persistence in convincing the Tsar to send troops to Jangaria does indeed raise suspicion. Given Gagarin's active participation in Chinese trade, a mercenary motive cannot be excluded in his behavior. His interest in alternative routes leading to China in the south of western Siberia is particularly alarming. Gagarin meticulously questions the inhabitants of Siberian cities about these roads. It is here that he proposes to the Tsar to build new fortresses and establish customs posts. It is possible that Gagarin is concerned about the unauthorized trading activity of the Siberian population. In the archaeological layers of Siberian cities from the late 17th century, traces of intensive trade exchange with China are abundantly found. According to the laws of the Moscow state at that time, trade exchange by passing customs was considered smuggling. In August 1714, Lieutenant Colonel Buchholz and his small team hit the road from Moscow eastward. On November 13th of the same year, they arrived in Tobolsk. A month later, the formation of two new garrison infantry regiments begins here, by recruiting conscripts in Siberia. Recruitment in Russia are introduced by Tsar Peter I. He is trying to create a regular army according to the European model. Young men aged 20 to 35 are taken as soldiers for lifelong service. Conscription represents a type of state slavery, essentially a peculiar tax, not in money but in blood. Evasion of military service was widespread. Many recruits try to flee from Buckholz's army. So that recruits don't run away, they are shackled and branded like cattle. 7 months, Buckholz collects and drills new soldiers. According to him, the recruits knew nothing of drill and they had nothing military. The departure takes place on June 13, 1715. Around 3,000 people are set off upstream on heavy cargo vessels named Dashanik. Buckholz hurries to the salty Yamyshevskaya lake, located on the right side of the Irtysh, 3 miles from the riverbank, to set up a winter camp here. In early October, the Russian flotilla hit the spot indicated by the Tsar. Within 1 month, Russian soldiers built a fortress of a new bastion type. Previously, wooden fortresses of the traditional Russian type were built here. In November 1715, a Junker embassy stops at the walls of a Russian fortress. The ambassadors are unpleasantly surprised to discover a Russian armed detachment in a fortress with cannons deep within their territory. The detachment commander vehemently assures them of the absence of aggressive intentions, but the Junkers have no reason to trust him. Over half a century, they have accumulated many grievances against the border Russian authorities. The Western Mongols are extremely upset that the Russian authorities are preventing them from collecting tribute from aboriginal inhabitants in Siberia, where they for a long time got used to it. Several times in the first decade of the 18th century, the Junkers attacked the border Kuznets Uyezd and inflict great damage on local residents. The appearance of new Russian fortresses on the border of 2 states is another reason for the dissatisfaction of the Junker Kontaiji. Shortly before Buckholz's campaign, the Junkers burned down one of these fortresses at the confluence of the Bi and Katun rivers. The Siberian city of Bisk is located here. Dissatisfied with the behavior of the Russian authorities, the Junkers plan another attack on the border city of Kuznetsk. The famous Junker commander named Tsarendanduk gathers an army of 10,000 strength, but abandons that idea and turns his army westward towards the Irtysh River. In early February 1716, the Junker army unexpectedly appears on the left bank of the Irtysh, directly opposite the Russian fortress. On the night of February 9-10, the Junkers managed to secretly cross the river on the ice and drive away all the horses, after which the position of Russian detachment becomes seriously complicated. Now Buckholz has no option of retreating by land. Floating down the river is also impossible. In winter, the boats are firmly frozen in the ice. The defenders of Russian fortress have only one way out: to fight until ammunition and provisions run out. During the first attack, the Junkers managed to penetrate the fortress, but they failed to consolidate their positions. A swift counterattack by Russian troops with the use of artillery allowed them to clear the fortress and establish a proper defense there. After the first unsuccessful attacks and losses from rifle and cannon fire, Junkers decided to stop the assault. Taking advantage of their numerical superiority, they proceeded to a siege with the aim of forcing the Russian detachment to voluntarily leave Junker territory. The siege lasts 11 weeks, from early February to April 28th. At this moment, an epidemic breaks out in the fortress of anthrax and scurvy. In early spring, 20 to 30 people die in the fortress each day. The long absence of news from Buckholes leads Governor Gagarin to suspect trouble. He gathers a new military detachment to aid the besieged fortress. On the way to the fortress, the Jungers manage to intercept this detachment and capture hundreds of people as POWs. In the late April, the ice on the river breaks up, and Buckholes secretly sends a messenger on an ice floe to Tobolsk with a report of the hopeless situation, of heavy losses, and the decision of the military council to blow up the fortress and retreat to Tobolsk. Gagarin is outraged by the decision of Lieutenant Colonel and the military council. He orders to stop the retreat, but the governor's reply letter was late. When the messenger departs from the Tobolsk, the remnants of the detachment have already boarded the boats and left the ruins of the destroyed fortress. On the way back, Russian soldiers founded a new fortress at the mouth of the small Om River. Over time, the large city of Omsk grew here. Recently, a monument to Lieutenant Colonel Buckholes was erected in the city of Omsk. The unlucky Lieutenant Colonel is considered the founder of the city here. The dissatisfaction of the Siberian governor is explained by Gagarin's confidence in the Jungers' inability to storm and besiege Russian fortresses. He appraised the retreat as a cowardice and a violation of Tsar's direct order. Later, during the investigation in the Senate, Buckholes criticizes the Tsar managerial decision to invade Jungaria, and I personally completely agree with his arguments. Firstly, Buckholes doubts the credibility of information about gold mining in Yarkand. Secondly, the Tsar foolishly underestimated the military potential of Jungaria, especially considering the small number of Russian troops. Russian Tsar indeed ignores the subjectivity of Junger state and its ability to resist the new Russian army, organized according to the European model. For the Tsar, the territory of Jungaria and its subsoil are an object for seizing gold deposits and new, shorter routes to India, if lucky, of course. And one more important point. I'd like to draw attention to the conclusion of the first Russian historian, academician Müller, who assessed the invasion of Jungaria as an attempt to impose one's laws on neighboring peoples and states with the help of military force. Historians in Russia prefer not to pay attention to Müller's conclusion, which has the character of scientific truth. And I want to remind that from the point of view of the famous German philosopher Immanuel Kant, scientific truth is always moral. In this sense, the pure motive of the Russian Tsar's behavior cannot be considered as a role model, especially not a universal law to be followed. A worldview that justifies the use of violence to achieve political goals is traditionally called political realism. The decisions of such political realists as Tsar Peter the Great always turn out to be fraught with bloodshed, human casualties and military catastrophes, as in the case of the disaster at Lake Yamyshev and other adventures of Emperor Peter the Great. And we can also see this right now, using the example of the war crimes of another political realist in long-suffering Ukraine. The end justifies the means. This is the main credo of political realists. War and cannon fodder, these are the very means necessary for realists. For example, to enrich the state treasury, as in the case of the Russian emperor, or to preserve personal power in Russia, like the modern realist dictator Putin. For this, they are ready to throw millions of human lives into the furnace. According to my calculations, as a result of the campaign and military operations on the Irtysh, the number of killed, died from diseases, prisoners and deserters amounts to about 2,000 people. Never in the history of Siberia, neither before nor after, have Russian military forces suffered such terrible losses. By the standard of Siberia at that time, this is a real military catastrophe, and no one knows where are the victims of this catastrophe buried. They are probably rotting somewhere in foreign land, on the territory of modern Kazakhstan, forgotten by their descendants, as usually happens in Russia, where human life is traditionally valued very cheaply in Russian society. And there is no end to the victims of modern and future military catastrophes, as long as the Russian people close their eyes to past mistakes and crimes, their own and those of their rulers. In my next films, watch news stories about the search for Eldorado, about attempts to reverse the flow of Asian rivers and find a way to India, by land and by sea. Subscribe to my channel, like and leave comments, listen to podcasts and read my scientific works on the Academy website, which you can find if you follow the link below.